Hi, this is Craig Nakamoto. The video you're about to watch is about an A-frame that I built with some friends on the east coast of Canada. This was us arriving on the scene April 1st. There was quite a bit of snow that fell the day before, but luckily the fellow that we had lined up to clear the snow did a great job. Too heavy to plow, but he used I think a front end loader and got it all cleared out. That's our first delivery of supplies, brought out by the local Rona, who did a great job of bringing things out as we needed them. There's the tools that we brought on the plane with us. We had to carry all the batteries in our carry-ons, and that all went quite smoothly. As you can see here, we spent the first 2 days working on the foundation, which consisted of three 30-foot beams. They're actually triple 2x10 pressure treated beams, and those are sitting on 6x6 deck blocks. Actually, they were sitting on 6x6 pressure treated posts that were on the deck blocks, that were sitting on 2x2 patio stones, that were just sitting on some gravel. Now, we had a pretty tight timeline, and we were working pretty hard to try to get everything sealed up within 11 days before leaving. So day 2, we spent a lot of time making sure those three beams were spaced evenly, perfectly level, and perfectly square, because that obviously is a fairly critical starting point for any house project. The actual design comes from a book, and I'll put a link in the description to that book if anyone's interested. I made a few modifications, but more or less followed the design very closely. There are different ways that you can build an A-frame. You can build the floor and build some knee walls, and then put a beam up along the top, and then put your trusses on afterwards. This design consists of the foundation of those three beams. And there we are, putting some cross bracing in. There's our first load of dimensional lumber, and then right after that we also got a load of rough cut lumber right there from a local mill. So the design is basically you build triangles and raise them up and put the sheathing on, and the bottom of the triangles make the floor, the sides of the triangles make the walls / ceiling. The triangles are 20 by 20 by 20 in this design, 20 feet by 20 feet by 20 feet. The bottom consists of two 20-foot 2x10s that sandwich the sides, which are 2x8 trusses. So it's a double 2x6 joist along the bottom, and then 2x8 trusses. The joists are attached to the trusses with 2 lag bolts at each join, at each corner, and then the top trusses are attached with a 3/4 inch plywood gusset that's glued and screwed on each side. So we built a jig on the end of one of the beams to help cut all of the angles for our wood. Since there was so many angles that had to be cut, almost every piece of wood had 1 or 2 angles cut into it. But once all the wood was cut and everything was ready, it actually went very quickly. Assembling the triangles and raising them was a pretty straightforward job for 2 people. We just left the bottom parts of the triangles all sitting there and put some plywood on so that we'd have something to stand on while we were raising the first set of triangles. But there is no floor built ahead of time. It's just the beams and then the triangles. Yep, so as you can see, the triangles go together pretty quickly, and then what you do is you just support the triangles with some 2x4 bracing temporarily, and then once you put the sheathing on the outside, the plywood, you can actually line up each truss to be exactly where you want it, so that the plywood makes everything square after the fact. Which is pretty nice, because then you end up with a roof that is dead on square, which is pretty rare. and we were put to the test once we installed the metal roofing, and it was perfectly square. So once we got to the last couple triangles, it was a bit more challenging because we had to stand on the ground, which is quite a bit lower than the top of the beams. But again, we just used a couple of 2x4s and we were able to raise up the last couple triangles pretty easily. Really lucked out with the weather here. They were calling for rain and snow and freezing snow and wind. We got the wind, but pretty much avoided rain and snow. Here's the roof being delivered. BML Roofing, these guys were great. We brought everything we needed to assemble the roof. Can't believe that guy backed all the way down the road and down the driveway, but he did. Nice thing about that roof is that the panels are only about 11 inches wide, which meant that I was able to install those panels by myself. My friend Rob was out for the first 7 days, and then I had the last 4 days on my own. Actually, I did have some help from one other person there for a bit as well. Here we are, real-time video instead of stop action, raising the last triangle. It all went more or less the same though. We propped it up to near vertical, then one of us would go around and straighten it and attach the temporary board just to hold it in place. And as I said before, we don't actually attach anything down until we're ready to install the sheathing. So once all the triangles were assembled, we carefully added the sheathing for the roof. And as I said before, I would just mark off the 2-foot intervals on the top of the plywood, put it in place, move the trusses so that they lined up exactly where they were supposed to, screwed them down, and carried on. Now you can see better where the loft is going to be. There's the roof sheathing. There's some view from the back. There's a view from the loft. We've assembled the floor. Day 7, we were finishing off the sheathing, putting on the membrane, roofing membrane, and then we started installing the actual roof panels. There we received our insulation. The plan was to fully insulate the floor and the walls, just so that was done in case we ever wanted it in the future. No plans to spend time there in the winter right now, but much easier to do it from the get-go. There's a roof going on. I mean, I love the triangles. The A-frame is just such a strong structure, basically indestructible. And with that 60-degree angle, shouldn't have to worry about snow load or rain or wind or anything. This was probably the most unpleasant part of the project. There's different ways of doing this. You can put blocking in along the joists and then put the plywood down from the top, but I had to just decided to bite the bullet and put those boards on from underneath. There was enough room to crawl around underneath, so Figured that would work out fine, especially with the framing nailer. Made it a lot easier to get those things up. And then I just sealed that all. Actually, before we even put the triangles on, I ran, you can see it over on the left there, I ran some hardware cloth all the way along the beam so that once I put this plywood on, it would overlap the hardware cloth. So you can see the hardware cloth right there. And I just left about a 1.5 inch space between the beam and the plywood going along the bottom of the floor. So that vent is for the roof, and those little triangular pieces that are in there are just to keep the insulation on the floor from covering up the vent. And you'll see later when we install the actual vents in the roof, so the air will flow up from underneath the A-frame and then right out the top of the roof. So here we fully insulated the floor. Here I am actually doing some roof installation on my own. A bit slower than 2 people, but perfectly doable. You just, it's looking pretty cozy there. Actually, that was the first night I slept in the A-frame. There's a view from the top. And there's a sample of roof venting in place, which would be underneath the insulation. Day 9 I didn't get any stop action, but we managed to frame, with the help of another friend, managed to frame the entire back wall, install the door and the windows. Day 10 we started on the front wall, and my buddy had to leave, but I continued on and got most of the framing done. Now these end walls are not load bearing, so the framing is really just to hold up the sheathing on the window and the doors. Now I was in a bit of a rush because I only had one more day and I needed to get everything sealed, and obviously the roof had to be done before I left. Here's my last day. This is day 11. So I was focused on at least getting things sealed up and then getting the roof done. So I managed to finish the front wall here. I actually built a little deck on the front so that I'd have something to put the ladder on so I could get up and frame that triangular window. I was able to get the 2 side windows in, the easy ones. There you can see how straight that roof was at the end, dead on. Unfortunately, I ran out of time and I wasn't able to install the last door or the upper triangular window, but I did complete the roof. Yeah, cutting those roof panels is a bit painstaking. There I am putting the roof cap on, vented roof cap, of course. Yeah, so I just ran the TYKEK right across that front wall to cover up the door and the window that I didn't have time to install. Those 2 duffel bags was all of the luggage that we brought out on the plane, all the tools. And there I boarded up over the window and the door. There's a view from the back. And that's how I left it. Didn't quite get as much done as I wanted, but pretty good for 11 days of work. Now luckily I was able to get out again the following month, and another friend of mine and I drove out. We spent 4 or 5 days getting things wrapped up. We were able to stay in the A-frame. There's a loft with some insulation in place. And here you can see the roof venting and then the insulation. We built that platform running from the loft out to where the front triangular window goes so that we could stand on that while we were doing all the insulation boarding along the top of the A-frame. That's what those weird boards are on the top there. That's just a temporary platform. So as you can see here, we got all the insulation done. While that platform was in place, we also did the soffits on the outside at the top, just out of reach of our ladders. There's a soffits on the back, which we completed using the scaffolding that we had set up the previous trip. And there's my buddy starting to put on some of the boards on the inside. It took a lot longer than we thought. We didn't quite get all the boards installed on the inside. There's the soffits done in the top half on the back wall. Started doing some boards. There's the front wall, soffits all done. And again, those are vented as well from the bottom right to the top. So here on the inside you can see we started putting the boards in. There's the loft looking much more almost complete. Here's my buddy Jonathan. Very thankful to all my friends that helped me out. Finally got some steps on there. Probably should have done that as soon as I built the deck. Those are the first stairs I ever built. There's the back wall with all the boards in place. So we didn't do the trim and the batten. Same, there's a rear wall again with all the boards in place. And when I go out next, I'll just put the trim on and the batten. I'm going to build a ramp off the back with some wheelchair access. There's a view underneath the cross bracing. You can see there's quite a bit of space under there. Pretty sure it's a little too open for any animals to take up residence. There's the front with all the boards done. Now I was concerned about the green lumber that I had ordered that we didn't finish using, and we took the time to pile it all up inside the A-frame, and then some of it's underneath the A-frame, so it should be good. There is all the paneling that's going to be going up on those walls, and I just piled it up in a crosshatch pattern inside out of the elements. Here's our temporary loft ladder and loft. There's looking out the front. There's the loft again. And that's how we left it. Until next time.